Ura, hello and welcome everyone today to the Walking Together Australian Indigenous Women's Perspectives and Insights of their Journey and Leadership Forum. I would first like to begin with an acknowledgement of country and pay my respects to the elders, martyrs and champions, past, present and future of the Eora Nation, as well as to any and all the members and descendants who make up the families of the 39 clans today. As an Aboriginal man, I would like to thank all the Aboriginal women throughout history for everything they have done and continue to do, and to remain strong Aboriginal women who are proud to come from the oldest continuous civilization on earth, the cultures and societies of the Aboriginal people of Australia. Thank you. I would now like to pass the microphone to Dr. Patricia Jenkins, President of the United Nations Association of Australia. Welcome, Dr. Patricia Jenkins.
Thank you very, very much. Hello and welcome everyone to the webinar. As you've just been told, Walking Together, Australian Indigenous Women's Perspective and Insights in their Journey of Leadership. I would like to begin by thanking Uncle Wallengarry for the warm welcome of country and for his spectacular didgeridoo performance, very Australian. And I'd also like to express our appreciation and congratulate the organisers of this year's forum. My name is Dr. Patricia Jenkins, President of the United Nations Association of Australia New South Wales Division and Vice President of the Association nationally. This webinar episode is in collaboration with NGO Commission on the Status of Women 65, Affinity Intercultural Foundation, and the Journalist and Writers Foundation. These institutions and distinguished panel speakers promote community harmony and social cohesion in one of the most culturally diverse states in the world. And although coming from many miles away, we are united with you in spirit and goodwill. It is also very special to be here with you today, as these forums have enormous potential for the exchange of relevant information and discussion at the grassroots level for diverse communities and related to achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women, leaving no one behind. However, there is still a long way to go to ensure equal participation for all. As United Nations High Commission for Human Rights and first Executive Director of UN Women, Michelle Bachelet, said recently, we will not be able to face today's challenges if we continue to exclude large portions of the population from leadership and decision making. And as stated in that landmark document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. All women then should have the opportunity to bring to the table their distinctive cultural knowledge and skills. Without further ado, I would now like to introduce today's facilitator, Lisa McMillan. Lisa has 30 years experience in the media, having worked in commercial radio, newspapers, the ABC and SBS. She was a senior executive since 1987, managing radio newsrooms and ABC News Radio in Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney, Australia. She retired in 2015 to concentrate on windsurfing, sailing and learning languages. Lisa is also a valuable member of Affinity's Advisory Board. Thank you all and warmest welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Dr. Patricia Jenkins, for your warm introduction. I'm sure that you'll all agree that today's collaboration with these remarkable institutions is a fitting tribute to the importance of women's rights. Before we begin our virtual couch conversation, I'd like to introduce our fantastic speakers. Brianna Amy Katie Naparula Briscoe is a 23-year-old proud and Martyra woman She's an able seaman aircraft technician who works with the 808 Squadron in the Royal Australian Navy and has been serving for 4 years. Brianna was born in Darwin and was raised in a small Aboriginal community, in small Aboriginal communities northwest of Alice Springs. She currently lives in Nowra, New South Wales, and is based at HMAS Albatross. Brianna is one of 6 siblings and is a strong believer in Aboriginal culture and traditions, the power of positive thinking, both in and out of the workplace, and she's a strong advocate for the empowerment of all women throughout the world. Philippa McDermott is a Waka Waka and Mulunjalli woman from the north coast of New South Wales. Philippa is a committed public advocate and champion for diversifying the media, content and workforces to best reflect contemporary Australia. With over 25 years' experience in media and employment, she provides strategic thought, leadership and direction on implementing corporate strategies, including RAPs, or Reconciliation Action Plans, employment and economic development, and diversity strategies. Philippa's goal is for an Australia that acknowledges and embraces our shared history and culture to build authentic, purposeful relationships with First Nations peoples. Philippa is the lead on Indigenous employment at the ABC. Chairperson of the Bangarra Daz Theatre and Board Director of the Australian Indigenous Leadership Centre, Philippa has a Bachelor of Arts in Communication from UTS and is the current UTS Indigenous Alumni recipient. And Taylor Gray is a sovereign Wiradjuri and Ngunnawal woman and lawyer. She works as a sessional academic at the University of Newcastle, where she teaches Aboriginal tertiary studies through an alternative entry program. Taylor is also undertaking a PhD in law with a focus on native title and economic theories, which seeks to encourage economic growth and land reform for First Nations communities. Taylor rose to public attention in July 2020 after successfully challenging a prohibition order sought by the Commissioner of Police to ban a Black Lives Matter march in Newcastle. An outspoken proponent of treaty, Taylor is a strong advocate for First Nations people in Australia. Welcome, Brianna, Philippa and Taylor. Each of our speakers has a presentation for us prior to our discussion. And so, Brianna, if you could please begin.
Yep, no worries. Thanks, Lisa. Ing Napuro, Murdangage, Anamumberin, Ing Angenum, Ning Lingerigic, Wari, Wandanian, Chirich, Murninardi, Alanimal, Nunal, Inibnibal. That was an introduction for myself and an acknowledgement to country, paying respects to the Wari and Wandanian people in my Armatjara language. I'd like to say thank you to the people who helped me throughout my journey. Cecile Chavez, Dean Briscoe, Tradara Briscoe, and my other Armatjara mob, Dale Fowler, Tina Elliott, and the rest of my defence family. Good morning to you all. I am Brianna Amy Katie Napurula Briscoe, and I'm a proud Armatjara and Warlpiri woman from my father's side and a proud Filipino descendant from my mother's side. I'm currently an able seaman aircraft technician working with 808 Squadron, and I've been serving the Royal Australian Navy for 4 years. I was born in Darwin, then raised in many Aboriginal communities northwest of Alice Springs, such as Laramba, Nyirpi, Coniston, and many more. For the majority of my upbringing, though, I was raised on Armatjara land, and I'm very grateful to have been brought up traditionally with community and speaking the Armatjara language. I've been asked to speak to you today about my life, my culture, my traditions, and the strong, hardworking, and empowering women who have helped shape the person I have become and who continue to keep me balanced and connected in my life. My people are desert people, and my dreamings are the Yiramb, which is the honey ant, and the Nyumaj, which is the witchetty grub, which I must say are delicious. My people are still living and practicing in traditional ways to this day, and our language is still very much alive. That's why I think my people are particularly special, and this makes me very proud. The first woman of influence I'd like to speak about is my mother, Cecile Chavez. My mother moved to Laramba at 15 years of age with my father, not knowing anything about Aboriginal culture. Although she is not an Aboriginal descendant, for the last 30 years, my mother is highly respected and recognised as an Armatjara woman who has strong cultural connections with our community, which is our family and our country. My mother learned how to live off the land, cook, speak, dance, and paint the Armachiraway. Not only did she do that, but she also played a great role in putting my many brothers through their initiation ceremony. Although I cannot say anything about the men's side of the ceremony, I can say that for the women, it consists of a lot of hard work on their part. It is fatiguing due to the immense amount of mental, physical, and emotional strength required to support the men for these ceremonies, which can last a number of months in the desert. Even though my mother had such incredible, joyful, and powerful moments in her life within the community, she also suffered greatly from abandonment, physical, mental, emotional, and financial abuse. During this period of the hardest times for my family, my mother always figured out a way to support all 10 of my sisters and brothers. She couldn't shield us from the things that were happening, but she never failed to provide a meal on the table or show us love. As a woman today, I could not imagine what she was going through. My mother made it out of these troubling times, and she is now a Deputy Director and Executive Operational Manager for Kentish Lifelong Learning and Care Incorporated. This is an out-of-home care and an early childhood education and care program. She is still the person I contact when life gets a bit too much. I'd now like to talk about my sister, Chudara. When my mother moved to Darwin to find a career in the Western civilization, my mother played a huge role in raising me. She fed me, nurtured me, cared for me, and when things got tough, she was always there. At 14 years of age, she became pregnant with her beautiful boy, Kai. This was such a great challenge for her due to people staring and judging her for being a young mother. Chudara would have to pump her breast milk during school hours in the bathroom because she was so driven and determined to balance both motherhood and high school for another 3 years. Under all of the circumstances that she was faced with, Chudara made every effort to become a very successful artist, building her own high-end business, which even allows her to showcase her beautiful work overseas. Growing up in the Western world was difficult for my sister and I because all the English we knew was broken down and no one could really understand us and we couldn't really understand them. There were also those racial slurs that kids would throw at us because we weren't proper. But all those comments encouraged us to learn how to speak English properly and get a good education. I remember going to a school assembly for the first time and everybody stood up and started singing the national anthem. I recall being so shocked and thinking, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. It wasn't always easy living in Aboriginal communities as well. The kids would call us Walwal, which means white person, or they'd call us Chinaman. I felt like I couldn't fit in anywhere. But as the years went by, I learned to ignore all the hurtful things that kids would say and become well educated. I finished year 12 whilst working 2 jobs. One was working at a pharmacy and the other was working in retail. For a while, I loved it, but then I became a very difficult person for my mother or anyone to handle. I was completely off the rails and headed down a very dark path. To this day, she calls me the most challenging child out of all of her children. I struggled to get out of the toxic cycle of domestic violence, drug and alcohol abuse, and self-harm. Had it not been for my mother's influence, I wouldn't have realized that I needed to turn my life around for the better, for not only myself, but for my family and for my future. My mother then suggested I join the defense. I remember thinking, no way in hell am I doing that. It wasn't until after I did some research and completed my basic assessment and interview that I realized how cool would it be to fix helicopters. So here I am now. My mother now uses me as an inspirational and motivational example to instill passion into educators who care for vulnerable children and young people to succeed in life. It was such a long and hard process joining the Navy and becoming an aircraft technician. Being so far away from family, studying every day for exams, and being put out of my comfort zone constantly. But being raised by such strong and resilient women encouraged me to strive for greatness. Although it was great finding myself a successful career and getting myself a good education in the Western world, I lost some of my connection to country and my ability to speak my language fluently without getting embarrassed. Because of this, it's so important for me to go back to my home country so I can connect back with my roots and rejuvenate my soul. This is what a lot of non-Indigenous people don't understand, is our connection to country. Our connection comes through songs, dances, artwork, language, being on and caring for country, and educating, to name a few things to explain connection. We are country, and country is us. My mother, sister, and I have great teachers and mentors, such as my other mothers, aunties, nanas, and sisters. These women help shape the woman I am today, and I cannot say how thankful I am to have such admirable role models. Being an Aboriginal woman in the Navy makes me so proud, and I just want to encourage not only other Aboriginal women, but all women to be a part of something great. So I stand here in support of all women with different cultures, different backgrounds, and different ethnicities, and strongly encourage them to continue to be powerful, continue to be courageous, and continue to be great. Inga kangum antarala wukal, chinin engage. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Brianna. And I'd like, that was fantastic. And I'm really keen to hear a bit more about fixing helicopters amongst a whole lot of other stuff. I'd like Philippa McDermott, could you please tell us your story?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brianna. That was amazing. Wow. I think we're going to pick up a couple of themes here about our women and our leaders and our mothers and grandmothers. But firstly, I'd like to thank Walangari for his wonderful welcome and performance. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Bidjigal land today at Kamei, Botany Bay in Sydney, which is what you can see here behind me. And I acknowledge the elders past and present and our emerging leaders. I'd also like to thank Matt and everyone involved in putting this together at Affinity and CSW 65 Forum. Also, I can't start today without acknowledging all the women around Australia and around the world that have shared their brave stories so recently and experiences and stood up and marched for justice for all women. So thank you. Like a lot of people, my journey did not start out to be one of leadership. I think like many Indigenous women, our journey starts with our families and in our communities. I watched my grandmother take those small steps day in, day out, year in, year out. My grandmother, Violet McDermott, was a very proud Waka Waka woman and just only recently passed away at the age of 98. And she was the matriarch of our family. Now I wish I had a slideshow to show you her too and my family. But Nan didn't aspire to be a leader. It was not conferred on her by our traditional cultural systems, most of which she was forbidden to practice when the invaders stole her land and turned it into what is now Eidsvold and Hawkeswood stations in central Queensland. My family was then forced to work for little or more than clothes and rations. Her leadership was forged out of survival. Nan had 13 brothers and sisters and was one of the eldest of all of those. And she lived, Nan and my family lived under what was called the Aboriginals Protection and Restriction of the Sale of Opium Act, which was enacted in 1897. That act controlled everything Aboriginal people did. The government controlled where you lived, who you could marry, where you worked, if you got paid, what you got paid, if you could attend school or not, if you were removed and or removed, if your children were removed and or you were removed onto missions or reserved. Every element of your life was controlled. And the state of Queensland was segregated until 1971. In fact, the apartheid legislation of South Africa was based on the Queensland Protection Act. This is the truth of Australia, the true history: stolen wages, stolen land, stolen children. We were only counted as actual people and citizens of this country in 1967. And I need to tell you that part of my history because it's a lived history that I can never ignore and I will never forget to tell because it's the truth. Leadership comes in many ways and takes many forms. I would never have really called myself a leader. My journey has been out of a need and want to help my people. How could I not? I was given such a privileged life that my whole family fought for. They fought for us to go to school, to be counted, to have all the opportunities they never had, and that drives me every day. But this is not just my story. This is the story of every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person in Australia. Every single opportunity I have had is because of them. Our leadership is born in our struggles and in our communities trying to help fight for our survival and our rights. So for all the opportunities I've been given, I want to give back to help my people because we're still fighting for our rights. For Aboriginal women, it's the intersection of being Black and being a woman, or intersectional discrimination and disadvantage. That is the combined effect of structural racism experienced as being a woman and gender inequality experienced as the result of being, the other way around, Indigenous racism experienced as being a woman, and then gender inequality as the result of being a woman. My journey is that of shared responsibility to keep pushing forward, a shared vision of what we all want as a collective of First Nations peoples. Our women are the backbone of our families and communities and many organisations and many more things. For me, I was fortunate enough to go to university and I knew the media was where I wanted to see change. I never saw anyone who looked like me, or if I did, it was on the nightly news about something bad that had happened. I rarely saw a good news story and I knew how powerful that was and I was desperate to change it. My journey really started in community media at Koori Radio in Sydney and Sydney's only Aboriginal radio station. As I became more proficient as a broadcaster, I then ended up going on the board and for many years and then becoming the chairperson. My generation were really the first generation of Indigenous people in any real numbers to go to university. It was in the 80s and the 90s. And with those skills, we all took on leadership roles, helping set up organisations and drive community control. Of course, we were inspired by our older brothers and sisters in the 70s and the 60s, and of course, our families way before that, all of our pioneers. We didn't really always know what we were doing or getting ourselves into, but we just kept going. Organisations like Bangarra Dance Theatre, Bimali Artists Cooperative, Blackfella Films, Black Books, all took their roots in that era. And since then, I've been on many boards and worked in many organisations trying to dismantle the structural barriers that have stopped us fully participating in our society. My work every day at the ABC is about dismantling previous policies and practices that have marginalised and stereotyped my people over its 87-year history. And the ABC is a willing partner on this journey. We have more than 125 Indigenous people across the organisation now making amazing content on TV, radio, news, online, social media and in films, and you can see the difference. Many of our TV shows are using Indigenous place names. The 7 p.m. news in Canberra, Darwin and Adelaide so far all have acknowledgements of country on their screens behind the newsreader at the opening of the bulletin, and that will roll out around the country. And these are all small steps towards truth-telling from Australia's national broadcaster. And I'm very proud of the ABC for coming on this journey. I'm also wanted to be the chairperson of Bangarra Dance Theatre and also on the board of the Australian Indigenous Leadership Centre. But with Bangarra, after the last year during COVID, as an arts organisation in Australia, I think all of those years of working in community organisations had led me to help Bangarra through the worst year of its life. We lost 90% of our box office revenue. Our people couldn't get back into their communities. They were doing rehearsals and practicing in their lounge rooms for months on end. And it was, as many people know, in the arts, a really bleak time, but we came through it. And of course, I didn't do it alone, and you never do. It was the combination of all of the years of experience on our board and in our management that got us through. We pulled out every skill set we had, and then some we didn't even know we had, to try and turn things around. And fingers crossed, we're back on national tour in June. So upon reflection, when I really needed to be a leader the most, all of those years of training came through. I've met the most amazing people who have taught me so much and shared their wisdom. Women who have shared their wisdom, their experience, their love with me. Many people have put their trust in me to lead in their organisations and workplaces. They must have seen something in me that I didn't even really see in myself. And for that, I've been so blessed. So my talk today is really for all of the women and men in my family, my mum, my nan, my aunties, my sisters, my friends, colleagues, and who have helped me along the way. My leadership journey so far has been an absolute honour. It's given me strength and courage and a love of helping and supporting young people and watching them grow, or anybody really. I have so much optimism about our future with the next generation of our people. There is still so much to do, but I think with all of our combined efforts, we're on the right path. And just after hearing Brianna's talk, and I'm sure when Taylor speaks, you'll see that we are definitely on the right path. So thank you.
Wow, Philippa, thank you so much for sharing that journey and your truth telling. It was fantastic to hear. And you're right, I think we're going to hear even more. This has just been so far a very uplifting and inspiring morning. And I'd like Taylor to kick on and continue on with telling us her journey and sharing a bit about herself with us, and then we'll all talk together. Taylor.
Thanks, Lisa. Firstly, Arnie, Philippa and Titta Girl, Brianna, thank you so much. What an honour to be in your presence. And to the rest of the panel who has put such an important event together and who care so deeply about women, thank you. And as I begin, I'd like to acknowledge on the unceded lands that I'm on, which is the lands of the Awabakal and the Worimi people, whose lands have never been ceded. The sovereignty has never ceded. And most importantly, this is, was and always will be Aboriginal land. We come from a matriarchal society where Indigenous women being in positions of power was not a foreign concept to us. And this is a legacy that I come from. So thank you for having me here. I feel so happy and so humbled. I read a quote last night and I couldn't find who the author was, so I want to start with that. And it goes like this. What I know and what I have believed since I was a little girl is that Black women are stronger than any lie told about us and any form of weapon that was used against us. After all, we survived. We survived a genocide. We survived sexual, physical harassment, you know, from every colonial weapon that is thrown at us. We are still here and we are stronger than ever. And we do not owe anybody thinness when it comes to our existence or the way we work in leadership roles. So a little bit about me. My name, Yamaduma. How are you? Yuan Yande Taylor. My name is Taylor. I come from the Wiradjuri and Ngunnawal people, and I say it's the center of the universe, but don't tell the other mob because they'll probably have something to say about that. I work as a sessional academic and I'm a PhD candidate. And I studied at the University of Newcastle, and I'm continuing to study at Newcastle University. I teach a pathways program called YAPUG, which is an Awabakal word for pathways. How did I end up here? I ended up here in the YAPUG pathways because I failed year 11 and 12 miserably. Both year 11 and 12, I never passed a legal studies assessment or exam, and I'm telling you that was both year 11 and 12. But I progressed, and the Wallatuka Institute at the University of Newcastle reached out to me and said, hey, you should come and do this YAPUG Pathways program. And it was there where I was really nurtured by Black academics, in particular Black women. And, you know, they cradled my education. And as I went into this program, I said to myself, there's no way I'm good enough to do law. I didn't get the marks. What was I thinking? So I might just settle for something, a little less demanding, but also just as important, like social work or PE teaching. But it wasn't until Dr. Charlene Leroy Dyer, another First Nations staunch woman who ended the class early and said, hey, we're going to finish this class early and we're going to go into town and we're going to protest for the forced closures of Aboriginal communities. And so we did. We ended class and we went in town, and I remember standing at the front of the march holding a big sign up, and it just fueled me. It lit something in my stomach that was already there. It just ignited it even bigger than what it was. And I said to myself in that moment, actually, I am smart enough to do law. And so I did. So I went on and I graduated law last year, and I was admitted to the Supreme Court to become a lawyer last month. And I've come a long way, because in my final year of law school, I ended up topping the class for the advanced legal writing and research. So this is the importance of mentoring young women at an early age. And we have a responsibility to address the educational opportunities to ensure success and understanding for not just me, but for all young First Nations women. And we have a responsibility to invest in their futures, because if we don't, we miss out on a really critical perspective. First Nations women comprise of 2% of the population, yet we are 34% of the prison population. And studies reveal that every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander woman in prison has experienced physical or emotional abuse, including family violence and sexual violence. And a study conducted that over 80% of these women in prison, Indigenous women in prison, are mothers. And I remember reading a source by anthropologist Phyllis Kaberry, and she writes that there was this perception in so-called Australian society that Aboriginal women were no more than domesticated cows, and that our morals were so low that it was impossible for us to be raped. And is this why Indigenous women are the most vulnerable when it comes to sexual violence? Is that why we have such high rates of that? Because of the perception around us. There is so much more to me, than my Aboriginality as well. I'm a woman. I'm an auntie. I'm a niece. I'm a daughter. There is more to me than just the title an Aboriginal woman. And this is a collective liberation for women, but we can't do it without the voices and perspectives of First Nations women. And what has influenced my leadership beyond being an Aboriginal woman, because that is first and foremost, women constitute a high proportion of law graduates nationally, but in New South Wales, 51% of practicing lawyers are women, but women continue to be underrepresented at senior levels, and 25.8% of partners in law firms generally is what women consist of. And there's 34% managing partners, and as little as 23% as practicing barristers. And at the bar, it's 23% they are practicing barristers. But you don't have to be a woman to fight for equality within any profession. All you have to do is be a decent human being. And I think the women's movement has to make room for a lot of engagement with men too, with men, about men, because I don't think we can progress with leaving one another behind. And I think that's all I have to say for the moment.
Well, that was plenty, Taylor. Thank you so much. That was so powerful, and just love hearing the self-belief and the story that you have just shared with us was amazing. And I think what we've just heard is three incredible stories, which have been so inspiring. But I want to talk a bit more about that and have you all speak with me a bit more about how we got there and where are we going from here with the stories and with leadership. We heard a lot about your influences, the mainly very powerful women who have influenced you, and you've had support from those role models. But obviously we've heard about challenges as well, and I want to understand a bit more about the challenges that you are still facing in your daily lives and work. So maybe Philippa, if I could start with you on that one.
Thanks, Lisa. Wow, thanks, Taylor. And I just want to say that I didn't finish high school either, funny enough. And And I think it's not an uncommon thing for our people and our women. And I think there's something in that later on I found some strength, and my strength to be able to think that I could do it as well. So it's interesting. I know a lot of people, you know, who didn't end up finishing high school kind of, you know, in a straight line. I kind of did some things around the place, and then I realized that I could do more, that I was worth more. So I did a bridging course to go to uni, to finish high school and then to get into uni. So, interesting. I've heard that similar stories a lot. I think, well, some of the challenges are definitely education. That's for sure, because the system doesn't suit us necessarily. And, you know, I think the biggest struggle for our people is poverty and racism. And from poverty comes, you know, lack of housing, good health, you know, education, all of those things. And racism is the kind of structural inequity on top of all of that. And that still exists in communities and in schools, you know, and I think that's, you know, that's something that we've really got to work on. I mean, that is the biggest challenge that I deal with every single day. And it's not these overt acts of racism, you know, like the Ku Klux Klan. It's these tiny little microaggressions, these, you know, casual racism, and not knowing the true history of this country. If people, I do cultural awareness training at the ABC, and the amount of comments I get when I just tell them about the Protection Act and, you know, the policies and things that have flowed on from that, and what our challenges are because of that. And so many people said, why don't I know this? You know, why? And these are young people too. Like, I don't know this history of Australia. And if they did, they would actually understand why we are still facing the challenges that we're facing today. So, you know, and that's why truth telling is such an important thing. And it's not to blame people or to make people feel guilty. It's actually to get a better understanding of who we are and what this country, you know, as a country, so that we can move forward together.
And Brianna, can you let us know a bit about the difficulties you're facing, apart from trying to find out which bit of the helicopter goes together, which I'm sure is also a bit of a challenge. And you just need to unmute to let me hear your answer.
Sorry.
Yeah, right.
Very important to, you know, use our struggles to keep going, to keep getting stronger and become resilient, you know. And like Taylor said, never think you're not good enough and just keep going, just keep educating yourself. Education is key to a lot of things, to everything pretty much. And I think we just need to keep educating ourselves on anything. Yeah.
And Taylor, I've seen you nodding away with both Philippa and Brianna's responses. What could you add to the difficulties and the challenges that you're facing?
One of the challenges and the difficulties that I face is imposter syndrome. You know, I have that little feeling of, am I good enough, or, you know, am I smart enough to be here? And I have these doubts about my own abilities and power. So I'm still trying to navigate that, but at the end of the day, I embrace that feeling and I still continue to say yes to opportunities. And, you know, being a young First Nations woman, you know, all three categories, though, you know, young, Black, and I'm a woman, it's like people don't actually take me seriously sometimes. But I'm up for the challenge, and I think it's important that we back ourselves. And I like what Aunty Philippa said too about, you know, people just, it's challenging for us because you've got non-Indigenous people that say, oh, we just aren't aware that this is happening to First Nations people. And I think that's a challenge in itself to hear, because, you know, like we have known about this since birth. And I think it's important, like we must go beyond awareness. I remember Professor Kathleen Butler said on a panel the other week, everybody has awareness. You know, my car is running on low fuel and I'm aware that I need to fill it up. But it's not about the awareness that fixes it. It's what you do to fill the car out. You get out and you fill the car with petrol. So how long must we wait? How long must First Nations women wait for the rest of the society to catch up to our struggles? Yeah.
So what has to happen there? How do you move from a state of awareness to improving education for the entire country, or what is the solution and how do we get there?
I don't think the solution can come just from me. There's a lot of First Nations minds who have the answers. But if I can humbly say, in my opinion, I think it's don't expect the emotional labour to be spent on you from Black people, because it becomes exhausting explaining to non-Indigenous people what racism is and how it impacts on us. I think it's very important to self-educate. And I know a lot of academics in this field who could give a much more succinct answer, whose work is in this, and they should be the experts because it's their field.
Lisa, look, I think there is a lot of work going on, like in terms of businesses actually taking up the challenge of educating their own staff through the reconciliation process. You know, there's 1,500 companies, a lot of them the top 500 that all have RAPs. And part of those RAPs is cultural awareness training and understanding. So, you know, there are different sectors and industries that are doing different things. I think the media has a massive responsibility, and that is literally why I do what I do every day, so we can get more faces on air, so we can tell our stories from our perspective and not have other people tell our stories. And, and I think education, absolutely. You know, and the one thing that my mother and my grandmother always said to me is that they can try and take your land away, your language, your culture, but no one can ever take your education away from you. Once it's in there, it's in there. And I mean, and that could be said about our sovereignty and our other things as well. But, Australia, it's not compulsory. Aboriginal history is not compulsory in schools. It is perspectives of Aboriginal history are entwined into the curriculum, but the kind of linear history is not taught. I mean, certain schools will do it because they have a majority of Aboriginal kids or what have you, but it is not actually compulsory. And until you go to kind of high school, you can choose Aboriginal studies as an elective. I mean, I think until Australia really wants to come to terms with that, and it's not, as I said, it's not like guilt-telling history, it's just the facts, then I think that will, that's going to be part of our challenge.
Thanks. It's fascinating what you're saying. I want to move a bit more towards leadership because obviously, apart from faces, we need leaders in the community to move from where we are. Brianna, can you tell me what leadership looks like to you?
Leadership, what it means to me is pretty much a people person. Like they take care of their people, they follow, and they're very motivational. Sorry, I'm a bit stumped. and can anyone be a leader? Can any of us here be leaders, or is it takes a special type of person? It takes a special type of person, but if you work for it, if you keep educating yourself and acknowledge everyone around you, I think anyone can be a leader.
Taylor, can you tell us your view on leadership?
Yeah, I think leadership is inclusion of everybody, not just people who look like me. I think it should include, brown women, Muslim women, trans women, and leaders have that growth mindset. They're always willing to learn, and they're willing to take the accountability for, the actions of other people. And they listen. It's very important that leaders listen.
And Philippa, your take on that?
Look, I think the word leader is really loaded. It means so many different things. We get really cranky when in the media you put somebody up as an Aboriginal leader who is not, we don't lead one person for all of our people. We have different leaders in different communities on different things. So, you know, putting one person up as a, you know, Aboriginal leader, which is a tag that the media often uses, actually infuriates a lot of Aboriginal people, because we're not a homogenous group. You know, we have, you know, hundreds of different tribal groups and nations around the country. So, you know, I would never dare say I'm a leader for my community. You know, I might be of an organisation or, you know, in my workplace and parts, you know, for my community. But yeah, I think it's really loaded, and I don't think everyone can be a leader. I don't think a lot of people don't want to. And there's a lot of unassumed leadership in and around the place that kind of, you know, can lead you down the wrong path, I suppose, as well. So yeah, that's just my opinion.
No, and you have that different construct that it's not necessarily the person who's standing in the front of the room who's the person who is guiding the thought process and changing views and opinions. So it doesn't have to be the person standing out the front saying, follow me.
It's usually auntie in the background doing all the work. You know, running the community and, you know, and supporting the community and the people there.
That's
and
right.
She, you know, who is unassuming.
That's a great point. Fran, I want to turn to you and ask about cultural richness in our society. How do we develop that?
I think it's just about educating ourselves on the different cultures that we're all surrounded by, and by acknowledging our differences, we can develop our cultural richness, I think.
Okay. How much does culture influence your daily life, and how do you retain it in your daily working life?
Culture is everywhere, where it comes from, just our own culture, work culture, anything it can come from. Yeah. It's just about educating yourself.
So we've had a lot of talk about self-education here. It seems to be a bit of a recurring theme. Tyler, can you talk to us a bit about culture in your daily life?
Yeah, culture. It's my very essence. What is it to me? It's dancing. I think almost every month I get together with First Nations women and we dance. Culture to me is sitting around the old people, my elders, having a cup of tea with them and listening to their stories, because we are an oral culture. I think that's really important. It's connecting to country. You know, it's protecting country from mining companies, from people wanting to dig up our land, and a way we can maintain that cultural richness is by sharing with one another, because we are a very generous culture and we don't want to keep it all to ourselves. We actually want to share with other non-Indigenous Australians too, but you have to invite us to the table and you have to welcome us, because we've been welcoming you since 1788.
Thanks. And Philippa, a lot of nodding there. Would you like to add on the culture question of how you retain it in daily life and what it means to you?
Yeah, I think, well, it's being mindful that we need to maintain our culture. COVID has really kept me away from my community for a long time. I'm going back up in April. Our elders, like, we didn't really want to go up to our community because, you know, we're from Sydney and that we don't want to go in there if, you know, in case anything, you know, was transmitted from COVID or what have you. So I haven't been able to be on country for a long time, and it makes me feel a bit sick, really, because I haven't been there. Although I've been blessed to work on Gadigal and Bidigal land, and I actually take it quite seriously to look after this place as well, and to go to the sites around here and, you know, work with the organisations here that are helping, you know, care for country. And so I get some nurture out of that, and I also get to, you know, to help look after places. So, I mean, I think, and culture is everywhere. I mean, For me, you know, also being in the communities here, working in community organisations, especially at Bangarra, I mean, that's what we do every day, is tell stories, work with communities to keep those stories alive and to share them with the world. So, you know, they're dancing every day. You know, they're going on country, working with elders and community people to ask, you know, if they can share their story or if they want their story to be told. And I think even just like in the media, we're an oral history, oral culture, like just telling our stories is, you know, part of that as well.
Which we're doing today. Just on the arts, yes, absolutely, keep going. On the Bangarra angle, and I was just wondering a bit about the importance of art in developing leadership. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Well, I think as Indigenous leaders, well, you know, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, art is our culture, our life. I mean, it's expressed through various art forms, but it is basically cultural maintenance for us. It is maintaining and retelling and telling new variations of our stories, and passing those things down, those stories and histories down to our children and sharing them, as Taylor said, like, you know, we're a sharing culture. We want to share those stories. I mean, this whole country has a story. Every step you take, you know, on this land has a story somewhere. And, you know, it would be awesome if, you know, non-Indigenous people wanted to help. And a lot of non-Indigenous people do want to help and know and share and protect those stories too. So art is everything really to me. And I don't just mean like painting, all art forms are really cultural maintenance to us. That's why it was so important to help, you know, to set up those organisations, because we can share that, we can keep telling our stories, and our cycles still continue through those contemporary art forms.
Thanks, Philippa. And I just wanted to point out that we're getting lots of messages from across the world from people who are hearing these stories that we're talking. So that's wonderful. And I'll just say to the audience who is listening that if they have some questions for our fantastic panel, if they could use the hashtag #AskAffinity and send through some questions, which I'll put to our panel.
Yeah, there's a lot in the chat.
There's a lot of the chat coming through, so that's fantastic. Brianna, could I just ask you a bit about the younger generation and what your message would be to younger people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, about leadership and the issues we're talking about today?
I think never thinking you're not good enough is first and foremost number one. Using your struggles to grow stronger and just keep educating yourself.
And that goes to the imposter syndrome that Taylor spoke about. I love that analogy. I've not heard it before. Taylor, could you tell us a bit more about messages for young people? And if you want to talk a bit more about imposter syndrome, I'd love to hear about it, because I think that's just something that I wasn't aware of, but I can see it happening everywhere. So,
yeah, I think my message to young people would be to walk with purpose and back your abilities. And seek a mentor. Talk to your elders, you know, talk to your mentors, talk to your elders. Really absorb all of their knowledge and their perspectives, because older people carry a lot of wisdom. But at the end of the day, young people, I think it's important that you back yourself and you support your own decision. And I think a way we can do this, supporting our young people, is by listening to them, by investing in them, by teaching them until they actually get the concepts, involving them in every process, and mentoring and just supporting them. Everything, their decisions as well. But at the end of the day, back yourself, challenge the imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. There's a question from one of our listeners about what's being done to assist young Aboriginal girls to stay in school, live in a safe environment free of violence, and to develop their dreams. Who would like to tackle that one, about what's being done in that space?
I think there's a lot of programs that are happening in schools, middle schools especially. It's a program called Girls Academy, and that's really helping putting through our attendance levels, making go very high. Even just as simple as giving us breakfast in the morning, giving us a safe place to just to be in. So I think that's a really good thing that's happening at the moment.
Yeah.
And yeah, Philippa, yes, please.
I was going to say, look, I think it's patchy. It depends where you live and what state you're in, you know. So I think, you know, in terms of education, that is one of the closing the gap targets, not a gender-based target, but they haven't met that target. And there was a lot of effort and work put into that. But, you know, in our communities, half of our more regional and remote communities don't even go to year 12. Like literally Brewarrina or, you know, in New South Wales, they don't even, school finishes at year 10 there. So you have to go to Dubbo or somewhere else, you know, to actually even finish school, or boarding school, which is almost impossible, like for people to pay for. So, you know, I think there's still a lot of gaps, and look, we're trying to fill them. But, you know, a bit more coordination would be helpful.
Yeah, and Taylor, can you tell us along that line a bit more about the alternative entry program to uni? How does that function?
It's a great opportunity. I think and it really equips me for my first year of university. And the best thing about it, it's free. You don't have a massive HECS debt that builds up for when you actually leave university. So it runs for 12 months, and it's here at the University of Newcastle, and it's solely for First Nations people. But in saying that, there are other pathways too for non-Indigenous people, which is called Open Foundations, which runs for 6 months, and it's for people 21 years and older. And they've also got New Step for 18 years of age, non-Indigenous people too. And really, it teaches you how to write essays. It teaches you how to think critically, and, you know, all the academic tools that you need. But the sad thing is we have governments that like to target these programs. And, you know, it's been the center of attack a couple of years ago, where they were going to cut all the funding for this. And I think if we do that, it's really going to impact on people, you know, who don't have high HSC marks. I was one of those people. And I think every high school student should be offered the opportunity to do an alternative entry pathway program. Everybody should be offered it.
Okay, yes. I want to ask you all about what sectors are getting it right, because you talked about something's going well and funding is endangered. What sections of the Australian community and industry and government are getting it right at the moment?
Well, in one way, you could say universities have been trying to get it right, because, well, we've got more people graduating now than we've ever had, you know, which is amazing. And you never hear the statistic that, you know, there's actually more, and Stan Grant keeps saying this, there's more people graduating university than there are in jail, but all you ever hear about is the people in jail. So that, I mean, I am just so excited about that. Like when I finished uni, like back in the dream time, there was 200 people across the whole country, Aboriginal people that finished uni. Now there's like 27,000. So like you can see why I am so thrilled, because I can see the difference in 30 years. Like I can see it. For me, as a employer, I go to graduation ceremonies and there are corporates waiting at those ceremonies to try and employ those kids. Like the ABC can't even compete with the wages that some of those, you know, those corporates are getting. So look, I think, you know, I'm not going to be pessimistic. I'm totally optimistic compared to where we've been. That, you know, I think a lot of the corporates are getting it right, probably better than, you know, I mean, government's doing their bit about employment. But, you know, I mean, I think, you know, I think there, in terms of employment, there's a lot of opportunity.
Wow, I didn't realise the dream time was so recent, Philippa.
Well,
We've got a question from a Native American person who's asking, there are very few Native people in high governmental places such as Congress and the state, and how does Australia do in pushing for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in government? Taylor, could you talk to us a bit about how that's going potentially?
Yeah, so Yinyamara sister, to my Native American sister from across the waters, we say that you're our kin from across the waters because you are. What does Australia do? I don't think they do enough. I mean, we've got a handful of staunch First Nations women in Parliament and government bodies working in there, but there's not enough. There's not enough in senior positions, not just for First Nations women, but for women in general. I don't think we're doing enough. And also the pays, like the pay and benefits too, which may scare women away. The gender gap for pays, I think that could help a lot. But what are we doing? I don't know. What are we doing? What are we doing?
But it's also the culture. I mean, you can see what's just happened in the last week,
Absolutely.
About the culture of Parliament, that what woman would want to join Parliament? Like, seriously, who would? That culture is just unacceptable. And no workplace would put up with that. No workplace in Australia, just about. Yet they have been able to get away with this rubbish for, 200 years. So I think, they actually need to lead by example. And that is why, and all the women I know that are in Parliament have said the same thing, or left. Why would you stay?
I worked in federal Parliament 30 years ago. I don't think anything's changed. And in fact, I think it might have gone downhill. Certainly no change, which is extraordinary. But it does appear at this very moment, as you say, in the last week, maybe we are seeing some sort of movement. Maybe we are seeing some sort of change. So that's
Shazam.
Across the round. Shazam, indeed. We have a listener from New York who wants to know how we promote culturally sensitive content in the media for mutual understanding and respect for diversity and multiculturalism and policies and guidelines. So, Philippa, I might turn to you to talk about that and also to talk about the success of the Indigenous employment program that you are having at the ABC right now.
Oh, well, thank you for your question all the way from New York. I hope you're safe there. And, well, look, I think the way that we get those perspectives out is through Indigenous people telling those stories. So, I mean, non-Indigenous people can tell stories as well and tell some of our stories, but really that's been happening for a long time, and it's not the perspective or the lived experience of the journalist or the storyteller if they're not Indigenous. So, I mean, with that comes a wealth of nuance and understanding of detail that other people who have not have that lived experience can't tell. And it's not, and it's a better yarn for it. It's a better story for it. And that goes not just for Indigenous stories, that's all diverse stories, like whether you're CALD or LGBTIQ, people with disability. I mean, we're doing all that work at the ABC, and trying to bring those people in because we need them to tell their story, their way.
Absolutely. I want to ask a personal question about what the difference you feel your leadership, your personal leadership can make to other Indigenous women and certainly other Indigenous men and women in general. What impact does your leadership have, do you think? Taylor, if you could kick off for us.
I don't know. I don't know what it has, what my leadership has, and if I'm a leader, people classify me as that. I don't believe I am. I just think, I finally I have a platform to say all the issues and concerns that my people have been saying for generations upon generations. And that's why I don't classify myself as a leader. I'm just reiterating everything that my community and people are saying. I don't know. The short answer is I don't know.
but you're influencing us right now. So it's again, not being an imposter, you are a leader, and you're here talking to us now, I think. So it's really great to be hearing your voice and your honesty on this. Philippa, have you got some insights in how your leadership can affect others?
Well, look, I mean, I think from feedback that I've had, it's going to depend who you talk to, right? So if I'm leading at the ABC, I am having conversations that have to be brave, and I have to work with journalists and tell them the truth that sometimes their storytelling sucks, and or, you know, that was not the right way to go around doing something, or, you know, you didn't include this or whatever. Like I have to do a lot of that. So, and it depends how you deliver that message too, and lead the organisation through this kind of change and what have you. So, you know, people at work might have a different opinion of how I lead or what my leadership, as opposed to people in my community, as opposed to people in my family. And, you know, so, but I don't know. I suppose the feedback that I've had has been that people appreciate being direct and being told the truth, and not being scared to have those conversations with other people in leadership, and you know, from a Western style of leadership in a hierarchy of a workplace, or, you know, what have you. I mean, it's about truth to power. I'm a truth seeker. And with my people, I might do it a different way, but I often listen and learn a lot too. So yeah, I don't know. Depends who you talk to, I suppose.
No, absolutely. And I'm just wondering if Brianna has left us briefly by the looks that I was going to ask her for her opinion. I've seen her dipping in and out, so might be an issue there. Taylor, can you tell us the proudest moment of your career so far?
I think the proudest moment was last year during the Black Lives Matter protest, where I led over 1,000 people. But before we even got there, you know, the police knocked me back my Form 1 to actually run the protest on the grounds of COVID. And I thought, you know what, this isn't good enough. Like, we shouldn't have to knock on, you know, the oppressor's door and ask, can we protest against their oppression? And, you know, being a young person, being a young Black person, a woman, I don't think they took me seriously in, you know, my own powers. Not that I have much power, but you know what, I have a lot of ability. And I think that was underestimated. But we ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court, where, you know, I ended up getting a prohibition order struck out, and we were free to march safely without having, you know, anybody arrested that day, because, you know, I had the court's permission to do that. And I think that was really good, because I felt like I had a lot of responsibility in my hands, and I could keep, you know, my community safe from being arrested. I think that was a real turning point for me. I thought that was the proudest moment.
Wow, yeah, indeed. Philippa. Yeah, big thumbs up and kudos to you. Philippa, your proudest moment, can you share that with us?
I don't know if I have one. I'm pretty proud of...
tell us a few then, come on. Tell us
look, the work that we're doing at the ABC, like, I really am proud of that, about getting more people on air and into the organisation, and them taking up the challenge and actually, you know, listening to us, and, you know, getting, you know, having 39 or 40 presenters across the country, and there was like 5, you know, 7 years ago, is making a difference. So I can see from a work perspective, that's been really, you know, a great moment. I think from my family, I'm a mother. I've got one of my youngest daughter is 12, which is completely freaking me out, but in this day and age. But, you know, hopefully, you know, I'm pretty proud of that, and being, you know, and of her. And, you know, in community, I think I'm just proud of my people, you know, for constantly, you know, rising above the you know, the struggle. And also, I think, you know, Taylor, you're right when you say people underestimate you, because they always underestimated me. And I think that is absolute power and strength that you have. If people underestimate you, it's great because you can kind of fly under the radar, and, you know, you can do things that people don't think you can do. And that, I mean, I think people underestimate Aboriginal Australia. So I'm proud of all of us.
Fantastic. And I think Brianna is just joining us again. Brianna, can you hear me? You're jumping in and out. While you're there, can you just tell us your proudest achievement, if you can stick with us with technology? Let's just stick with us for a while.
My proudest achievement would have to be joining the Navy and becoming a better person. You know, I know that, you know, I was going through a lot of struggles when I was a teenager, and I think a lot of people, you know, have walked through the same steps as I have as well. And I think just by pushing myself to join the Navy, I think is the greatest achievement I've ever changed. It's a change of cycle, yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. Philippa, you spoke of your daughter. I think looking to the future, who will be our leaders in the not too distant future, what's the best way to support and nurture those future leaders that we have coming through, so we have a, you know, more diverse, better functioning society?
Well, I think, you know, mentoring is important, but I think, you know, we do a lot of informal mentoring, and if people can just do that and be there and listen and support younger people, believe in them, you know, I mean, I am absolutely optimistic. You've got no idea. I'm so thrilled, you know, especially, you know, to see these two beautiful young women talking today and hearing their stories. And we've all come from adversity in one way or another, and we've overcome it. And look at us now. And that is the same for so many of our people. And I think, you know, just being there, you know, being a shoulder, yeah, you know, and being able to listen and help guide wherever you can. You know, that's what you can do. I mean, you can set up formal structures for that, which is important as well. But I think a lot of it comes informally, just by watching and being around the right kind of people.
Brianna, can you add anything to that one?
Oh, no, she said it beautifully, honestly. Like,
she does, doesn't she?
Yeah, I'm speechless from what she's just said. And same with Taylor as well. Like, these women are incredible. And I just hope that they pass down their knowledge to the younger generation, you know, because it'd be amazing to hear their words and them as well.
Well, Taylor, what would you tell to the younger generation? What would you say to facilitate their becoming leaders in the next generation coming through?
I think I said this before. I think just, yeah, back yourself. And I think mentors, whoever's mentoring or you know, facilitating mentorships for young people, I think listen to them, ask what these young people need. How can we help you? Listen and just ask, what do you need? What can I get you? And they'll tell you. They have all the answers.
Excellent. Well, we're getting lots of answers here today. It's been tremendous, and really thanking you for being with us. Philippa, I did want to talk about another aspect, not just the future, but community leadership, and with your role with Bangarra and with the Australian Indigenous Leadership Centre. Can you talk to us a bit about community leadership?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I think, well, I think that's where we start, most of us, in our communities, and our community organisations need people to help support them That's why they're there, and that's part of our, part of our self-determination, is to actually have organisations that are run and led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And that's why I think it's really important, and I've always been around to try and help support those organisations, even if it's an organisation I don't even know much about, which I didn't really know anything about dance. Let me tell you, I still don't. But I do know about governance. So those skills are kind of transferable. But also, and a lot of the time it's just getting in there and having a go. Like at Koori Radio, when we had no idea, literally no idea what we were doing, and we just kind of did what we could do. I mean, some people would come in and help us, but we were just a bunch of young people, really, just trying to hear our own voices represented on radio, and because that was the thing back in the day. I mean, social media now has just exploded all of that, and I'm so grateful for that. Because our voices are really being heard. But I just think it's really important, and it's been the biggest part of my journey has been able to work in my community this community here in Sydney, and be a part of helping support community control, because that is what is really important for us, or for me.
Thank you. Just some more questions from our audience. Not sure whether we'll know the answer to this one, but how did the COVID-19 pandemic impact the Indigenous communities in Australia? Does anyone want to tackle that one?
I'm going to give that a go, because I think we've done an amazing job. And I'll tell you why: because of our community-controlled health sector. If it wasn't for Nacho and Pat Turner and another woman, and her leadership in closing down Aboriginal communities in January, while the Prime Minister was still going to the football, we would not be in this amazing situation we are in today, where we have had such little, contact with COVID in our remote communities, and a lot of them are still locked down, and we couldn't go home, and we didn't want to go home because, we didn't want to give anybody anything bringing it from the city. So we have just done an incredible job. And that is because the government listened to community-controlled Aboriginal medical services and health services, and we knew we had to get on it straight away. And that is a prime example of amazing leadership, Indigenous leadership by a community-controlled, peak body. So I just had to say that, because that is something I'm so proud of.
I agree with you 100%, Philippa.
And Taylor, you had some pretty direct work with COVID, with your Black Lives Matter march. Do you want to talk to us a bit about how COVID impacted you in the last year and your work?
Yeah, I think as it impacted on everybody, but in particular because of the Black Lives Matter movement, we had the eyes and ears behind us. We had the support on board, and people were finally starting to listen. And we wanted to protest because we had so many allies on the bandwagon and willing to support us. And of course, we told elders to stay home who weren't capable of coming, because we were very greatly concerned of the health risk involved with that. But I think the COVID-19, and along with other corporations, were, it was very damaging for us, because they try to silence young Black voices. They try to silence the people. And that's how it impacted on us. But we grew from concrete. We're the roses that grew from concrete.
Love it. So great quotes. And so a response too from again, our listeners, happy to hear about the COVID reaction, because the American Indian and Alaskan Native people have suffered a disproportionate burden of COVID-19 illness during the pandemic in the United States. So it's interesting to compare and contrast the the reactions across the world to this pandemic and the different approaches that have been taken. And certainly the approach here in Australia was very swift and very definitive in the communities. Another question, is there a special program in sport or physical activities? Has anyone got any sporting ideas?
Millions.
Billions. Is that all?
They love Aboriginal people in sport. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I suppose, look, I think every sporting code is really trying to get Indigenous people involved if they haven't already. You know, look at the AFL, and I think probably women in sport could do a bit more. I mean, we used to have, I think soccer's doing well. I think for women in sport, it's probably a bit lacking. But there are big foundations set up like Clontarf and you know, I mean, even a foundation named after my father, the Lloyd McDermott Rugby Development Team, is about getting Aboriginal men and women into rugby union or sevens. They're actually, the women's team is doing incredibly well, Mahalia, and I think it's going to be Olympic sport, and they're going to smash it. So the women are doing really well in the rugby union as opposed to the men. So that's a positive thing. But I think sport, you know, is actually a leveler for us. And so it has been one of the earlier institutions or one of the earlier areas to catch on to getting Indigenous people involved.
I think even the Koori knockout too, Auntie Philippa.
Oh, totally.
The Koori knockout and the Murray knockout too. There's a lot of talent there.
Yeah. So, you know, I think in a lot of the sports, like even in tennis, look at Ashley Barty. You know, I mean, two women, Yvonne Goolagong and Ashley Barty. Women everywhere.
Yeah, look at them go. And do you guys participate in sport at all to help balance your work-life pressures, or are there other things that you use to balance work and the other side of your life? Taylor.
Of course, I love sport. I'm a sports fanatic. I used to play for the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs.
Wow.
And we have a country versus city comp for the women too, which we won in 2018. I got selected for country. So I was really privileged to play in that. But aside from sport, I like to read. I think Malcolm X says that my alma mater was reading a good book. And I could spend my whole life in a library reading books, just satisfying my curiosity. And I think I love it.
That's cool.
Philippa, you're following in Dad's footsteps with the football? Or?
No, not with rugby. I used to be very sporty when I was younger. I did a lot of swimming because I grew up here, and I'm a saltwater person. Swimming, surfing. I was actually a lifesaver at the beach, but volunteer. So I used to do a lot of that and a lot of other sports, but I haven't lately. I just had a knee operation and I'm actually really missing it. I like all sorts of sports really. I like skiing, sailing, surfing, I haven't played a lot of team sports. I did a bit of netball and some swimming in teams but so I want to get back into it. But for me, I think just being on country and being in the bush really helps me, like being away from the city, any kind of bush or at the beach, really. I'm a saltwater person. Just being at the beach and near the water really helps me relax.
Fantastic. It's so important to have that balance, but it's really inspiring to hear just the complexity of what's going on. You have so much going on in your lives, the families and the sport and the work, and just it's fantastic, and it's been tremendous to hear your stories. Sadly, Brianna's had to leave us. She won't be rejoining us, but it was so fantastic to hear her inspiring stories and the fantastic input from Taylor and Philippa. It's just been wonderful to hear it, and I know from the comments on the feed that the audience has really appreciated hearing what you've had to say about it. It's been so inspiring and so powerful. So I really appreciate that. But I'd also like to acknowledge that we've just been joined by the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner, June Oscar. Hello, June, welcome. So great to have you with us. And I'd like to throw to you, June, to ask you to present a keynote address for us.
Okay, can you hear me? Just unmuted.
Absolutely, loud and clear. It's great
Thank
to hear
you, and good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Thank you for this opportunity. So can I begin by saying that I'm joining you from Boonwurrung country here in the central Kimberley in Fitzroy Crossing, Western Australia. So yananga yata ngaranganda jo moai Boonwurrung yaneo, dango warawara yaneo. So I come to you from the land of the Dango people, and I acknowledge all the traditional countries that we gather on today, and I pay my respects to all of your elders everywhere, past, present, and emerging. And for those watching elsewhere in the world, I acknowledge all of our First Nations peoples globally and all of our friends and supporters. Thank you for inviting me to this important event to mark International Women's Day 2021 by highlighting the leadership perspectives of Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. Although the day was last week, I clearly feel the same as the event organisers, that we should recognise the incredible worth of all women and girls throughout the year, and then every year from here on in. Because I truly believe that working determinedly toward an intersectional and inclusive gender equality every day of every year until it is achieved is one of the most important things we can do, I believe, to deliver socio-economic and environmental justice across the globe. So thank you, Dr. Patricia Jenkins of the United Nations, the National United Nations Association of Australia, and to Ahmed Paulet of the Affinity Intercultural Foundation for bringing all of us together and creating this event for us to share in together. And I thank the many who are participating in this session, who are interested and believe that Indigenous women's voices and expertise can, and I know will, contribute to meaningful, long-term and sustainable change in Australia. I know this because as the first woman to hold the independent statutory role of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner, I decided to conduct one of the largest engagements there has ever been with First Nations women and girls as a distinct collective. The last time our women met as a collective and were consulted as a collective on their issues, priorities and aspirations was in 1986 for the Women's Business Report commissioned by the Department of Aboriginal Affairs under the leadership of the late Charles Perkins. So 34 years is a long time since we conducted our first national engagement and to the recent Wiyaniyu Tangani engagements. I called what is now a multi-year project. We Yaniyudangani, meaning Women's Voices in My Language, Wunaba, my team and I traveled all across Australia from urban to remote regions and met with over 2,000 First Nations women and girls of all ages. In December last year, the We Yaniyudangani report was tabled in the Australian Federal Parliament. It is no ordinary document. It is a whole of life report that charts the diverse landscape of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and girls' lives in their words and on their terms. It depicts our strength, what we have achieved, all of who we are, and lays out our aspirations for who we can become. And it talks about this across every sector and aspect of life, from community safety to housing, disability supports, economic development, and the growth of meaningful employment, health and well-being, and education. Whatever can be thought of that makes life what it is, our women and girls play a vital role in keeping our societies dynamic, safe, and healthy. And we Yaniyudangani capture so much of their work and knowledges. This report has been handed to the public and elevated to the Australian halls of power at an incredibly important moment in history. Let me set the context by reflecting on the year that has been. I know none of us could have imagined the global shockwaves that have confronted us since the last International Women's Day and CSW session. The pandemic has brought hardship to so many, and everywhere it has disproportionately impacted women, children, Black and brown people, and the elderly. Those who are most vulnerable in nation states with limited social economic protection and inadequate caring and health infrastructures. We have been papering over the cracks with a business as usual approach for far too long. The pandemic ripped back the facade and exposed cracks widened by growing inequalities over decades. Inequalities that have become entrenched along the deep fault lines of racism and sexism. The response over the last year from those who have had enough of being treated like they don't matter, like their or our lives are inconsequential to how we construct society, there has been uproar. Black Lives Matter erupted in the middle of last year in response to a system that has so little regard for our lives. It can all too easily lead to death at the hands of authority. Now, in Australia, we have another moment of historic reckoning where we must face how the structures of patriarchy continuously harm women, girls, and all people. These racial and gendered moments of reckoning are demanding transformation of our systems away from inequalities and power imbalances and redesigned from the ground up to be inclusive, fair, just, safe, and equal. In regard to this moment of momentum for transformation, I want to acknowledge the 65th CSW session and its priority theme of women's participation and decision-making in public life and the elimination of violence to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. This theme is significant in understanding how Indigenous women are key to systems reform. We heard clearly throughout Wiyani Udangani that when we provide the forums with clear accountability mechanisms that gives our women voice so that they can make the decisions on matters that impact their lives, systems, policies, and programs are enhanced, not just for them, but for everyone. And in the process, power imbalances are reduced. Dangerous forms of discrimination are confronted, and we begin to overcome race and gender-based violence. And in the forums where women and girls are supported to speak, they immediately think of solutions to complex structural problems. Throughout Wiyani Udangani, women and girls envisioned centering social and economic growth and stability around care and health infrastructure and employment. They spoke of lifelong learning and an education system that reflects this and incorporates diverse Indigenous knowledges and time spent on country. They imagined many training and employment pathways that can lead to the growth of new culture and country-based economies across diverse sectors, from carbon sequestration to maternal health and well-being. And surrounding all of this, they talk of the need for structures that recognizes their worth to society, that actually enable instead of undermines them. These are structures that are fully responsive and embrace a First Nations gender perspective on all issues. They would allow for things such as universal access to quality early childhood education and care, proper remuneration of caring responsibilities, guaranteed flexible work arrangements for parents, and so much more. What we heard from First Nations women is that they do the lion's share of paid and unpaid work. They work around the clock, holding up society. But their actions are barely being counted by the mainstream. And none of the structures they need are in place to support them. Instead, they describe being constantly exhausted, facing one barrier after another and trapped in cycles of poverty and powerlessness. This is the consequence of First Nations gender inequality. It harms and holds our women back and limits all of society. A major message of Wiyani Udangani was that we must stop committing these deep injustices that are perpetuated through our contemporary structures. It does not have to be this way. That is why Wiyani Udangani puts on the table for all to see and read a First Nations female-led plan for structural change. It is ambitious in scope and entirely necessary. At the heart of this plan is our women and girls' self-determination to be guaranteed and backed up by the structures of accountability and responsiveness. The overarching recommendations are to establish a First Nations Women and Girls National Action Plan and a First Nations Women and Girls Advisory Body that can guide, advise, and ensure that everything laid out in Wiyaniudangani is responded to and implemented. Australia currently does not have a national coherent framework to respond to our women and girls, nor does it have the architecture to achieve the many dimensions of gender equality. This has to change. When our women and girls speak, knowing that they can lead with authority and impact, they talk of the solutions that I have mentioned, which can break down the structures that trap us and rebuild structures that reflects all of who we are. Structures that gives us the room to breathe and dream, knowing that we can set out to achieve all of what we can aspire to become. This year, my team and I are doing all we can to pursue the implementation of Wiyaniudangani, so we can guarantee our women's self-determination and leadership now and far into the future. Key areas that I am focusing on this year to identify actions and structural reform are the cross-cutting themes identified by women and girls, which I believe are 4 pillars of strength that we can rebuild systems around and break cycles of inequality. They are enhancing our leadership and participation in all decisions that affects our lives, supporting our law, culture, and knowledge systems as key determinants of health and well-being, investing in our healing work and initiatives to break cycles of intergenerational trauma, and recognising our skills, responsibilities, and unpaid labour to break out of the poverty trap. I would love for all of you listening today to come on this journey with us. I encourage you to pick up the report, access it online, read it, and own it. Keep a watch out for what we are doing in this second phase of work. As the year goes by, we will be publishing resources and examples of how we can all take action to keep Wiyaniudangani on everyone's agenda and take practical steps in our own lives to achieve First Nations gender justice and equality in Australia. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you. Yaninja.
And thank you so much, Commissioner June Oscar, for those incredibly powerful words. To conclude, I'd like to call upon Affinity Intercultural Foundation's Executive Director, Amit Polat, to present the closing remarks.
Thank you, Cousin Lisa. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our distinguished viewers across the world. I would like to begin by sincerely greeting you from down under Sydney, Australia, I would like to acknowledge that I am joining from the traditional lands of the Kaprogal people of the Darug Nation and pay my respect to elders both past, present, and future. Affinity Intercultural Foundation's collaborations today with the United Nations Association of Australia, New South Wales Division, and the Journalists and Writers Foundation in New York stands as a proof of thought, support, and advocacy of the NGO CSW65 Virtual Forum. Today, our distinguished speakers enlighten us with some issues that are too often overlooked or even ignored. It is particularly important in the context of empowering women and girls, women leadership in our dynamic society. I'd like to sincerely thank our inspiring activists for equality and harmony and for sharing their inspiring stories. Brianna, Philippa, Tyler, and Commissioner Jean Oscar AO. Thank you for your perspectives on such important issues, especially at a time when they need to be heard by all Australians. And thanks must also go to my cousin Lisa Macmillan for so generously and effectively facilitating today's discussion. To Dr. Patricia Jenkins, my cousin again, for her warm introduction, and my esteemed uncle Valangari Karantarawa for his musical performance. I'd like to also pass my thanks to those assisting in the background of this event. I believe we all have learned so much from our panel speakers, though the responsibility to educate and encourage the next generation still remains on our shoulders. We must ensure they have a safe space in our community to engage and uplift themselves through intergenerational dialogue to gain true and dedicational leadership. True leadership is to be based on equality, trust, and sincerity, integrity and compassion, as well as promoting justice, and it does not discriminate or degrade. True leadership is a dynamic balance to produce and reproduce knowledge and should aim to solve the common problems of humanity, ignorance, poverty, and discord. There is no doubt that women make significant contributions to the economic, political, and social fields in our living society. I believe that NGO CSW, along with today's partnering organizations, search for solutions that can ensure true gender equality. This kind of effort shown brings hope for the future. On this occasion today, I would like to once again commend the contributions made in this panel by showing true leadership women throughout history. Dear viewers, I'd like to thank you all for your time and hope to host you tomorrow at the same time for the upcoming webinar, Young Women Leaders in the 21st Century. Thank you again. Have a lovely day.